The most asked question I get: hey, I want to do Canada in 7 days. I want to include Niagara, Toronto, Banff, Jasper, Vancouver, and Vancouver Island. Where do I start? But I must just stop right there. If that is you, then this video is for you and you must watch it. I give you 5 reasons why you need to watch it. And believe me, we just spent 2 months road tripping in Canada with our kids, and we know exactly what the reasons are. Reason number 1, the distances are longer than they appear. Like similar to the side mirror of the car. The car in the mirror is bigger than it appear. Maybe I said it the wrong way. Doesn't matter. What I want to say with that is, if you plan out a Canada trip, you look at the map, and especially as a European, you think, wow, that looks close, let's gonna do it. But if you take a closer look at the map over here, you see, oops, we're gonna do the Trans-Canada Highway because we go all the way over in Canada. So, the thing is, getting from Toronto to Vancouver are over 4,300 kilometers. Let's get that, over 4,000 kilometers. The Canadian train that goes from Toronto to Vancouver actually takes 5 days. So guess what? 7 days won't be doable at all. And even if you say, I want to spend 7 days in Canada, you won't be able to do that all in 1 week, at least not these destinations. So, one thing to remember, if you plan a trip, you usually have to add at least, for a 5-hour trip, or you have to multiplicate it with 1.4 hours of your driving time. Let's say you have 5 hours, multiplied by 1.4, you get to 7 hours, because you're planning all these breaks in between, right? Especially with children, and you won't be doable to drive 5 hours. Anyway, another great example, if we're talking about it, we started in Whistler, and let me come to it in a second, and we drove all the way over to Powell River. And it does look quite appealing to do this route, but believe me, if you drive from Whistler down, you have to count in the hour drive getting to 1.5 hours getting to Horseshoe Bay for the ferry terminal. Then you need to book a ferry to Gibsons, and then you also have to drive all the way up to the next ferry terminal over here in Earl's Cove to get to Powell River. So the thing is, you have 2 ferries, and you need to calculate in not only the ferry time, also the check-in, and I come later to that, and also the driving time between the 2 ferry terminals, and then how long you have to wait, and so on and so forth. So easily, we have been there around 12 o'clock for the noon ferry, and we arrived in Powell River after all about, what was it, around 8 o'clock in the evening. What that tells you, although it is a 5 hours drive, it took us way longer if you count properly, because although it's 1.5 hours, you have 40 minutes over to here, so more than 2 hours already. From here to here it's around an hour, so you're around 3 hours, and technically that's another 40 minutes here, so 3 hours 40. But if you miss the connection ferry, you have to wait almost 2 hours to get from this ferry terminal to the Saltwater Bay ferry terminal. Then, and that's also an important one, the second reason is traffic and the roads themselves. And that might be the case, for example, there might be roadworks that are along the routes that you can plan in. They might happen after you have planned your whole trip, so it takes way longer to go from one place to the other. Plus, if you travel with an RV, you can't drive fast, so usually travel times are a bit longer with an RV than with a car. That was great on our trip though, we had a car, but there were other things that weren't so good about it, but driving wise, that was amazing. We saved a lot of time getting from point A to point B, and like I said, if you talk about traffic and the way to certain places, you always have to count in this ferry rides, or maybe shuttle buses that you need to take to get to certain places. So that's another reason that you can plan properly for it. And a short drive from an hour could easily get to 1.5 hours. For example, when you are in Vancouver or around Vancouver and you need to cross the Lionsgate Bridge or the other big bridge in Vancouver, and you drive during rush hour, those two places are bottlenecks, and they have over and over again also car accidents. So although it shows you 40 minutes, you might end up having over an hour to get through Vancouver during rush hour. So these are things you sometimes not forget, but let's say when you're in a place you like it there, you stay a bit longer, and then somehow you have to go back home and it is during rush hour, so you can't get around of it. Alright, third reason, nature doesn't care about your itinerary at all. With that I mean, a classic example, if you go back to the map, we had to drive from Horsefly to Whistler. And in BC during summer there's always the wildfire season you have to take into account. And with that I mean, when you take the streets or the routes from certain places, these roads might be affected by wildfires. And what does that mean for your trip? You might need to drive around because the road might be closed, and that could take easily another hour or two. In our example, if we zoom in a bit on the map, we have to go from Horsefly to Whistler, like I mentioned. Usually that's a 5 hours drive, and we know from before, multiply by 1.4, around 7 hours. And depending on some places on the roads where you only have one lane, then you have a slow vehicle in front of you, it might take also longer. Another thing you can't count for. So what happened basically is there was a huge wildfire, and they're still working and fighting on it in this region. Then there is another big fire down here, they're still working on it. And then there is another big fire right over here. So those fires they're still fighting on it, but the roads, as you can see, are open again. But that wasn't the case now when we had to travel. So original drive would be to Whistler, this highway 97A, down over here Cache Creek, and then to Whistler. But that part was closed, so we had to take a detour, which led us from 100 Mile House over to Little Fort down here, down to Kamloops, and from Kamloops back to Cache Creek, and from Cache Creek then to Whistler. How long the detour was, you might ask? Well, 2 hours, full 2 hours. So that means if you multiply that 1.4, that's over 10 hours drive. And we left at 9 in the morning and arrived some around 7. So 10 hours drive in total, way longer than we would have anticipated, but it's part of the game. I need to take that into account. Then along the way, especially in this region up here and even further up here in these areas, you might also encounter wildlife, so you always have to pay attention for wildlife as well. That's another thing. There might be a moose rushing from the bush out onto your way, and you need to brake. It even can happen that there's an accident, you crash. You never know that. Let's cross fingers that never happens for the animal and for you, but that can happen. And also if you drive certain roads during winter, spring, fall, they might be affected by snow and ice. So another thing you have to take into considerations while driving to these places. And at some places the roads might be impaired by the weather, so there is a construction site due to it. So there are a few things that you just need to take into account that makes the trip longer. Just a quick one before you go ahead. For the last 2 reasons, grab my free Western Canada travel kit below. It contains everything you need to know, and it's a great basis for planning and starting your next Canada road trip. So, reason number 4. a time thief nobody counts for, or two less. With that I mean, I already mentioned it before, ferry terminal check-ins when they need to be there. In British Columbia, you need to be at the ferry terminal between 30 and 60 minutes before departure. Then maybe park gate opening times when you can enter a park. Another thing is when you need to check out the campgrounds, or when you can check in at the campground or at the Airbnb or hotel to buy, usually somewhere in the afternoon. So what are you going to do beforehand? You might do something in between. And when you do something in between, another adventure maybe, rock climbing, climbing park, whatever, you're going to end up with a longer trip than you might have anticipated. But another topic on that side is, I actually advise you to do something when you travel from point A to point B. You know that there are certain attractions along your way, then do them, because I want you to take these driving days also as an opportunity to explore things and not just to drive. Okay, next thing, maybe you have to fill up your fuel tank along the way. Your kids need to go to the bathroom, you might need to pick up snacks or coffee, whatever. So easily another 20 minutes that will be or can be added to your driving time. So that's also something you need to consider. And then also, depending where you're driving and which province you travel in, you might need to consider that the clock needs to be adjusted by 1 or 2 hours, maybe. Good. Now, reason number 5, and that's one that will actually destroy your idea of 7 days spending all or seeing all the attractions in Canada. You will see nothing if you want to see all these places in 7 days, because A, to make this happen, you would need an airplane to get from point A to point B, which is super expensive, and I bet 99% of you guys won't even have the budget to do so. Plus, if you travel by plane, we know all. We need to do the check-in, we need to go to the airport in time, then we need to board the airplane, then it flies, so easily half a day is gone. And then when you're at the airport, you not only need to get there, but you also need to get from the airport to these attractions. So another time either. And what it basically means, you end up having only 2 to 3 hours per attraction. But if you have ever been to Canada, we know all that is just not experience the country at all. You're not seeing a thing. And that's not the point. If you want to spend time in Canada, you want to really experience it. And if you spend, for example, 3 days at the same place, maybe at the lake, at a campground, where your kids can connect with other children, believe me, your children will talk about this for years. They will say, that was the best holiday, that was the best thing to do, it was amazing. And with rushing through, you won't see anything. You probably spend the most of your days in the airplane or in a car. And that's another video we'll make. What is how much days you should spend in Banff or Jasper or in general, exactly to answer this point, why it is crucial to planning enough days for a location. So 7 days in Canada is actually not the problem. 7 days across Canada is, on the other hand. So what I want you actually to do is, instead of rushing through the whole country, just pick a region. And based on my experience, here are 3 solutions or 3 ideas you can do that 7 days are actually doable. So number 1 would be Vancouver and Vancouver Island. Number 2 would be Calgary, Banff and Jasper. That's already a bit tight, but doable. And then the third option would be Prince Edward County, Toronto and the Niagara region. Also a bit tight, but also doable. So that's what you get with 7 days in Canada. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think? What would be the best option if you only have 7 days? And what would be your recommendation? where to spend these days and if you agree with it or not. And if you want to have the real travel times or maps or ideas, just grab my Western Canada travel kit, which is a good starter set for planning your travel or your road trip in Canada. And if you already know your region and you know where to go, check out my next video that is coming up, where I talk about how many days you should actually plan in for one location, and that also includes how many days you should spend in Banff or in Jasper or in Vancouver. Just that you know how many days you need to plan or have in general in total. Do I need 10 days? Do I need 14 days? Of course, it's also depending on your budget.